probably a good place to start with the beautiful Natalie and Kristen. Um, from Powrsuit, but from many things. Thank you, ladies, for joining me. I wanted to start with a question that whoever goes first has less time to think about. What does your brain look like? Whoever wants to jump in can go in first. Some people say it might look like a haunted house. Some people think their brain looks like a garden.
Mine
I
looks
feel
like a
like
calendar.
it looks
I
like
feel like, yeah, a calendar.
okay.
Yeah, because I feel like I have been a little bit of a project manager of my family or of a holiday or of what's coming up for work today. And so I'm just constantly balancing um, my calendar in my brain.
Love it. What do you got,
Mine looks
Natalie?
like a web. I think because I always find weird connections between things. We were talking about in our podcast the other day, we're talking about gravitas, and then I'm also in parallel watching The West Wing. And so I'm like, oh, this is how this connects, and then this is how another thing in this connects. And so it seems to constantly be trying to jump around and find different connections between seemingly random things that I happen to be doing at any one time.
Does it look like spiderwebby or more like kind of like we're finding the murderer connection
Oh
board?
yeah, the murderer.
There's so many topics that I could talk to the two of you about because you are amazing. I do want to talk about the birth of Powrsuit, but before I get into that, I want to talk about burnout and specifically because the two of you, especially from the outside, feel like you're crushing, you're building businesses, you're bringing women together, you're doing all of this stuff. I wondered because it feels like you've got this rich tapestry of access to really high functioning females. I imagine hand in hand with that, whether it's yourself or people you deal with, go through and experience burnout because I feel like everyone's trying to be everything for everything, whether it's in the workplace, at home. Like you said, your brain is even a calendar. I wondered if
Mm.
you had any tips on how you ever either prevent your own burnout or what you've seen be successful with people that you've worked with.
I would say contrary to what it appears, we are huge fans of doing less. Like that is actually a fundamental Powrsuit philosophy is doing less and doing that smarter. So I mean, we've both learned some pretty hard lessons throughout our careers. I'm sure I won't speak for you, Kristen, but of really identifying as from my perspective, for me, as someone who could work harder and longer and more productively than anyone else. Like that was a badge I wore with honor. And yeah, and really just that was a thing that I've said yes because so Kim pointing at herself. I think it's a thing that
Yeah.
at least our generation was really raised to think to correlate productivity with personal value and with our identity.
Yep.
And what I've realized is for me, the trick came when I realized that rest is a productivity hack and that you actually need a downtime in order to operate at your best. And there's all sorts of research to prove it, but we don't always, what we know in our heads doesn't always translate to what we know in our or to our behavior. And so as soon as I started realizing that and honing the ability to switch off and go, it is 5 p.m. on a Friday, I'm out for the weekend or I'm out for the night. I am no longer thinking about this, the more productive I became. So we actually at Powrsuit often spend a lot of time, and the whole philosophy and the whole way we set up Powrsuit is actually about taking things off our plates and doing less and making sure what we do is impactful, which is why it probably does look like we're doing a lot because everything we do, we ruthlessly prioritize, and it's the stuff that adds the most value, and we've sort of scrapped everything else.
Can I add to that before I let you jump in if you had something to add, Kristen? I I wonder if, and is that a luxury that you can afford yourself when you get to a certain place? Because I feel like there's also this like on the way up, and I reference myself, my sister, who are kind of like when you're like in that building stage, whilst logically I learning all about learning to receive and rest and digest because I live a lot in my masculine energy, the doing. I'm happiest there. Um, is is there any advice of how to structure that? Because I personally struggle with resting and relaxing when I feel like a guilt come on of so much to do. Like, was there a learning in that you had in that, Natalie, of like actually switching off at 5 o'clock and not feeling like the worst person ever or stressed.
Well, do you want to answer that, Kristen? Because I think we probably are quite similar.
Um, I think both Nat and I have a innate ability, and this is something that can be learned, by the way, but
Mhm.
of goes to Nat's web and her ability to connect the dots between what we're doing and impact. And so and that ultimately is strategic use of our time. And so we've got this honed ability that we've learned over years to be like, this, if we're to put effort into this, what's the return on the investment of the effort, or how does it connect to, in a company for example, the organizational goals, and how are we actually moving the needle? We use that cheesy corporate term a little bit, is like, is this actually moving the needle? And so when it comes to prioritization, everything is a nice to have, isn't it? But if you were just to choose the 10 top things based on the time that you have in a day that you genuinely believe are the most likely to move the needle closer to whatever the thing is you're looking to get to. Right now for Powrsuit, it's growing awareness and our membership base. That's what we focus on. And everything else is like well, there's two of us. There's only so much we can do. So I think that's a really learned skill. And Nat and I could probably take over anyone's calendar, look at it for a week, and ditch about 30% of it. Like we would just know automatically. We spent a lot of time coaching women as part of Powrsuit, and like we would just do that. We're like, why are you doing that? From things like that we can outsource, it might be cleaning, or it might be whatever, to things we can delegate, to now we can use the likes of bots and AI tools to join meetings and synthesize notes. And we're actually going to have a webinar on AI and how to hack your life with the tools that are available to us now for productivity. So there's so many things. I think we could rip out 30% of anyone's life. And then yeah.
I do
So
think, Kim,
On that,
to
oh,
your
sorry.
point on the way up, is we learned these skills on the way up. And I think that is, and we want to shortcut that learning. But the other real light bulb moment for me, and I'm not sure if you've experienced this, is when you realize that you control your time and no one else controls your time, because no one ever teaches you that. So everyone else, I mean, we're all selfish. So everyone else is trying to use your time for their benefit. So they're asking you to catch up with them. They're asking you to take on this meeting. They're asking you to take on this piece of work or this committee or this project for them. Like that's their job. That's what we all do. So once you realize that you get to control that and you get to say no if you don't want to turn up or if it's not valuable, and you can do it politely, you can do it professionally. That to me is the biggest light bulb moment for women, especially on the way up, because we are socialized to put ourselves last, to go, you can do this and be nice and be kind and be liked, but you actually are ultimately the only one who can do it, because no one else can do it for you, apart from Kristen, who can take 30% off. But but in general life, without us on your team, that is the reality, that no one will ever do it for you, and no one's ever going to tell you that, because it's in everyone else's best interest to keep using your time.
And I'll go a step further. I think it's also sometimes maybe for me it's an ego thing. I feel like as long as I feel busy, it stops it's a self-preservation tactic to stop me spiraling into my depression, because I still, despite lots of therapy, attach a lot of my validation to employment. So this idea or this badge, as you say, of feeling busy makes me feel like I'm adding value. So I would love 30% of my day gone. That's like my to-do list. But for anyone who's not watching on YouTube, I just held up one of my many hilarious daily to-do lists that I make. But I know I'm not alone in that. And I know a lot of viewers and listeners of my podcast in particular share kind of this anxious type A perfectionist energy that I hold. And I think a lot of us are just trying to navigate how to move that in a healthy way. And often it's a result of getting to a place of burnout, to when then we have to reset, and then it's really hard to not repeat some of those patterns. And I'm sure you've experienced women who have.
Yeah. Well,
And
you were talking earlier about getting better of asking for help. And one of the biggest learnings we ran about 130 women through a pilot program of Powrsuit last year. And what we learned is that almost every single one of them is navigating their lives and their careers and their families and the juggle and everything on their own. And so there must be this sense of socialization of, I don't know. I know certainly in New Zealand, there's this number 8 wire, do it myself, and there's this keep calm and carry on that's come over from the Brits, and I think no doubt in kind of fully industrialized developed countries, there's this real sense of we no longer have those family or community connections, and we're very individualistic, and that's ultimately the world we live in. And so it's like, got to do everything myself. And men have over this period, of course, developed really smart and strategic ways to have networks and win-win relationships. And we've somehow think we just have to, as women, have to do everything on our own. So I love that you're recognizing that. And that sometimes the stripping the 30% out is like, is it a partner you can rely on? Is it friends? Is it extended family? That's something we don't want to be this individualistic. We don't want to be a burden of others. And I think we've just got to get over that.
Mhm.
I think adding to that, Kristen, is something we talk about a lot, is most of the stuff around this area is focused on fixing women, and all of that stuff around feeling like a burden, that's socialized. Like that is how we've
Mm.
been raised. It is not innately a woman's problem that we all take on too much burden and that we lack confidence and that we equate our value with our busyness. Like all of that is learnt behavior and beliefs. So
Mhm.
our approach is very much, rather than focusing on the symptoms, to really get back to like, why is this the case? If all women feel like this, or a large majority of us, that is not an individual issue. That is a systemic issue. So how are we tackling that? And I think if you do have a lot of people listening who really do identify with that burnout and overload, it is not your fault. It is not something broken in you. It is a world we live in and systems that were created before we operated in them. It is a whole bunch of how we were raised and socialization. And we need to tackle that. Like that needs to
Mm.
change. But I feel like it is very easy to blame ourselves when it is just too systemic and too wide a phenomenon to boil it down to one individual failing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's probably the perfect segue into Powrsuit, and specifically, what have been some of the success stories, or some of the great takeaways from providing a bit of that community? Because for anyone who kind of doesn't know, you Powrsuit is essentially creating a network of women and a community of women and different programs in place to help with that missing piece that we're speaking about. So yeah, from how long have you guys been active now?
It's been 4 months of our membership network that's actually been live, and before that, we were very much in research and pilot phase, but we have a growing newsletter and podcast kind of as part of that, but it's been 4 months of the membership network.
And how have some of those women's lives changed? I'm sure they're very vocal if they are seeing some positive responses. Are you able to share kind of what that
Yeah,
journey
I'll
vibe
share
is?
one, and no doubt Nat will share a couple as well. We're just starting to collect our data now, but
Great.
one of this concept of navigating everything on our own also equates to all of these self-limiting beliefs and negative thoughts that we have, and beating ourselves up and feeling as though no one else thinks this way, or oh my gosh, I can't do that, or I'm not yet. That's such a big thing we hear. I'm not ready yet. And
Mm,
so by and so that's a thing that we learned. And then what we learned is that we feel alone. And so our solution to that is connect women at similar career stages, at similar life stages. So there's this aha moment of, oh my goodness, you feel and think and experience things exactly the way I do. And we're really good at building relationships, but where we fall down sometimes, again, because of these
mm,
systemic structures that have enabled men to have strategic networking relationships, and they've built all these back rooms and boys clubs, is that we can now turn those relational connections, us just chatting about our kids or about our first job disasters or whatever, into actually career enhancing connections. So that's one of the big wins that I'll share, is that we
mm.
on average, power suitors have made in 3 months, 3 to 4 months, they've made on average 4 career enhancing connections each, which
Wow.
means that they've made a connection with someone at a similar career or life stage, and that is going through and feeling the exact same way as them. And together they're growing, they're supporting one another and holding each other to account. So I would say that's a big win.
Shit, yeah, that's awesome. Did you have
Well, should I?
anything?
Well, I'll jump in with the other side because I think, to your point, we are all manically busy and everyone's overwhelmed. So any solution to this can't add more to our plates. It has to take things off. So Powrsuit is all about micro action. So we've got the incredible community side, micro networking, amazing. And then these bite-sized tiny actions that lead to outsized impact. So I have two examples of people that I think it was fabulous stories, and I often tell them. One is we talk a lot about elevator pitches. So how you introduce yourself and how you show up to meetings and networking events. So the first example of this was someone who sent us quite a disgruntled email saying, I came along to the mini masterclass. You told me I should introduce myself. And we have like really just break it down into the components of the value you add, any asks, and not assuming people know why you're there or what value you bring. And so she said, so the next meeting, I decided to just do it anyway. And I changed how I introduced myself and I did what you said. And it worked so much better than I thought. It completely transformed how people saw me. And it was just, she had this really funny way of putting it that she was like, I was a disbeliever. And
Yeah,
now you've proven
totally.
me
I
wrong.
came to see
And
what the F is going on here. And turns out it was actually really great. And I had a
yeah,
really
and it was just one thing. It was just a 2-minute intro or a 30-second intro that had such an impact on how this entire room of people saw her. And then
right.
the second example is from that same webinar or the same mini masterclass. And I had this call with this woman and she said, I decided to do it. And I said, well, I'd love to hear your elevator pitch. And she said, oh, I knew you'd ask. And so she did it. She was so brave and
Yeah,
just
cool.
gave it to me. And over the course of the 20 seconds she spoke, I went from being like, oh, this person's obviously nice and friendly, into, oh my goodness, this woman should take over the world. And I will hire her to do any advertising we ever need to do because she's so accomplished. Would never have picked that up had she not done this elevator pitch. And so for me, those are small examples of the power of tiny actions in creating massive ripples that have a real impact on your career.
So, I want to talk a little bit about male allies, and this is just maybe we may have lost them with our feminist chat, but if they are listening, or as a back pocket kind of token, is there anything, and I'm sure it comes up a lot in dialogue and conversations that you hold, is there any verbiage or any one tip that men could do to empower their partner, empower their girlfriend, empower their work colleagues that doesn't sound patronizing but is encouraging, that maybe is lacking? And how could you frame that?
I would start by being really curious and asking questions. And I think with any minority group that we don't, I think we make a lot of assumptions about them, and stats are thrown everywhere, and words that are polarizing. Even diversity and equity is polarizing. And anytime we start to divide, kind of by gender, there's this us versus them, and oh, that's a woman's thing to fix. And male allies, if they do try and stand up and speak out, sometimes they put their head above the parapets and there's a lot of judgment and it all becomes very scary. So I think a lot of male allies don't know what to do, and as with dealing with any minority group, I think the first position again is just being really curious and using that empathy to kind of, we were chatting yesterday with someone whose partner didn't believe the gender pay gap. And no doubt, because you hear about, well, it's only because women are all customer success and men are all engineers, and that's just the way it is. And then he got really curious as to why that happens. And right back to men networking out on the golf course, and therefore they're all salespeople together, and the women missed out on that opportunity. So I think just by him being curious and going, tell me a little bit more about that, and really just sitting and listening. And I think we can all do that in any minority. Like, tell me about that experience and how did that feel to be in that room and be different, is probably the most powerful tips, because no doubt they'll want to jump to solution mode and take action. But I think actually just sitting in a little discomfort and curiosity is something we can all take on as allies.
Yeah, that's such a good piece. That's actually interestingly very similar about what people say to anyone with mental health is like it's often solution based, and often that actually pushes the conversation further away because it actually isn't a
Yeah.
engaging
Just go for a
conversation.
walk outside. Go
Yeah.
take some exercise.
Well, I actually heard that you guys played a bit of golf yourselves on a meeting. Is that true?
We are
Yeah, that was
golfers.
weird.
You know
Nat,
what?
you tell that
I
one.
mean, so there's a couple of things there.
Mm.
One is Kristen is famous because she has actually been in the Otaki newspaper for hitting a hole in one. So she is actually a pro golfer behind the scenes. I, however, am not. I don't know how to play golf at all. And this is one of those examples of stretching yourself out of your comfort zone. Golf is an elite exclusive sport by and large, and has been. There's a whole history of it. Look it up. It's interesting. Part of the formal places where men meet to network and build careers. However, I'm a huge believer that we, alongside building up our own or other alternatives to networking, day spas, tennis courts, whatever, like getting together and having a glass of wine. I don't care. Let's build up a whole wide array of how people can connect and meet other people. But also, I think it's on us sometimes to step out of our comfort zones and join in and show allyship as well. And so, as someone who can't play golf to save myself, I was really surprised. We got invited along to a golf day with one of our fabulous partners, and we were probably 3 out of 100 people who were women. And it was a really insightful day for me because, firstly, the pushback I got in the lead up, the number of people, women, who said, "But you don't know how to play golf. Why are you going?" And I said, "Why does not knowing how to do something stop me from giving it a whirl?" Like, that's such a interesting attitude that I think is a real self-limiting belief. So I can turn up and be useless. I'm just playing with Kristen and another friend. Like, they don't care. And
Yeah.
also, actually, all the
Well,
men on the
we don't know. We haven't heard from her yet. She is
yeah,
the
well, to be
professional
fair,
golfer. So.
we'll throw to Kristen soon for feedback. But also that the men on the course field, whatever it's called, also just thought like we had a great time, and I got to see them in the natural environment. And then we're also big fans of getting outside of, well, getting out from in front of our laptops and thinking laterally about some of the things that we need to do. It was a beautiful sunny day. We decided to go to the golf course together and hit a ball while we talked through some of the things we needed to talk through. And it's like a walking meeting. It's fabulous. And I actually did hit the ball a couple of times that time. I got air.
Crossing now to the professional golfer.
Well, all I'll
whether-
say is that not only were we 3 of the only women out of 100 men who are all wearing the typical golf getup and were really competitive, and there was a lot of testosterone in that space, but we wore power suits, jumpsuits, and sparkly hats.
So we did win best dressed.
And one best dressed.
Thank goodness.
So,
My gosh.
yeah.
I realize I'm already at my time limit with you guys, but I would love to ask just 2 more questions if that's okay.
Amazing.
A question around vulnerability and confidence. I feel like you mentioned in one of your examples, it's like kind of like putting yourself out there and being vulnerable, which is ultimately confident. What would be your advice to someone who perhaps wants to do it, but has a bit of imposter syndrome, has a really not great sense of self, and I say this because I'm assuming the advice is going to be just do it anyway. That's not always the thought process of people, because I feel like they won't even put themselves in that situation. Is there anything that you can relate to or share that might encourage someone who's sitting on the other side of this, but wants to get there, but is just endowed with just so much blockage?
To jump to solution mode, which actually is curiosity again, I would say you're bang on. Like, this is why we talk a lot about tiny actions, because quite often what feels like a molehill to one person is a mountain to another person. So like, let's recognize that. The first action I would take is self-awareness, and we always talk about doing a strengths test. If you haven't done one before, do it. There's free tests online. And the reason we say that is for one of the strengths tests, Clifton Strengths has done research on this, quite funnily enough, and you have a 1 in 33 million chance of having the same top 5 strengths in the same order as someone else. And the reason that's important is when you do the strengths test, you will realize just how unique you are and the unique value you bring to the table. It will give you a point of evidence before you have to act on anything, to recognize that all those things that you do and think are just common sense and natural are not for 33 other million people around you. So I feel like that sometimes can give you that little reframing of your mindset into, you actually bring incredible unique value to the world. Other people look at what you do because they can't do it themselves. And I often think about that when I'm feeling like, what am I adding to the situation? I go, oh, well, I'm unique amongst 33 million people. So I
Mhm.
can walk into this and realize that my perspective, my experiences, what I bring to the table will probably be unlike everyone else's in that room.
Mm.
I think I spent my early career trying to act like someone else, a man, because I was quite often the only woman in the room. And I think we live in a time, we genuinely live in a time, it's not perfect, but we can actually embrace our own unique identities. And I know that sounds big and airy fairy, but it can start with the smallest thing, to Nat's point. Another way of asking about your strengths is to think just for 5 minutes, reflect on, what do people come to me for? And the second thing is to ask 3 people that know you, what do you think my strengths are? And once you start to get a sense of those, Nat has a great story where we're like, just double down on your strengths. You don't, like, forget your weaknesses, forget it. Just double down on your strengths. And only then can you kind of step in and go, oh my gosh, I'm helpful, or I'm adding value and I feel great about this.
Mm.
But Nat's got a story about, like, she tried to surf and she's like, why bother? I can do, my arms are too short, my center of gravity is all off. Kristen, you surf, I'm not going to surf. I'll stick to other things like golf. But I think we can let go of all the stuff we're not good at. And that's where we can outsource, delegate, and look to others to do that stuff. And just,
Mhm.
like, show up in your strength, but first find out what it is.
I uh I might add something to that because it just reminded me of something that we learned in comedy with improvising, which is a lot of people's biggest fear. It's been one of the best things I ever did because I am so busy up here. Improv, you just have to say what you think, and it really opened me up to a freedom. And one of the things I've learned from coming to different women's networking events, the women who maybe stand up and say, just to say I'm beet red and have sweaty palms because I'm so nervous, but I'm going to do this anyway. Them as an audience, we're kind of all on board. And I learned that in comedy. Like, if you burp in the middle of something because you're so nervous and you just carry on, now it's so uncomfortable for everyone. Whereas if you go, oh my God, that was so embarrassing, I totally burped, I'm so sorry. Anyway, moving on. At least now we're all in on it. I think this idea of
Yeah.
being perfect, like, so I've had to learn that as a little perfectionist of, like, here is the performance that I have done for you, but it doesn't connect people because it's not human. And sometimes those human moments that I've seen you guys kind of talk about in other talks, actually some of those vulnerabilities are what actually make us lean in and go, oh, that was so embarrassing, but at least she said something, because if she didn't, then I'm just the girl that burps that, like, now everyone's talking about, right? So
Yeah.
that
I
was
also
Great.
think the other thing that we've probably, as an undercurrent throughout this entire conversation, is we think we're alone. I did a post on LinkedIn once about networking because I'm nervous about it. I find it nerve-wracking turning up to those situations. And I learned a completely different lesson than I expected. Like, I was giving my tips and I just got this flurry of people going, everyone's scared of networking. And that was again a light bulb moment for me of, like, there are a few people who are naturals, but the vast majority of us find the same situations equally as intimidating. So when you go into a room, you can assume that 80% of the people in that room feel equally as uncomfortable as you. And again, I always find that helpful in going, they're just as desperate for me to walk up and talk to them as I am for them to come to me.
Mm.
And as soon as you stop thinking of yourself in that context as having a unique experience of torture,
yeah.
you start to realize that everyone is eager. They've all put on their big girl pants and turned up and felt scared and did it anyway. And they will be the most receptive people. And and I've had this before, I went up to one group once in a networking event and they were so rude to me. And that's worst case scenario, right? It's so nerve wracking. And you're
Mm.
like, oh my goodness. I was in hysterical laughter talking to a friend because turns out my reaction was actually like, what idiots? Like, I
Yeah.
wasn't actually offended at all. I was just like, oh
Mm.
my goodness, who comes to a networking event and is rude to people? Okay, bye. And so I
Mm.
just think sometimes we can build things up in our heads and think we're the only ones, but everyone feels the same, and that can give you a little bit of confidence.
Mm, that's so good. I'm well over my time, but it's because I love and enjoy you. If people want to join Powrsuit, they want to be part of it, they want to learn more about it. Perhaps they've loved this chat so much, they want you guys to come and speak at an event. How do people get hold of you and how do they get plugged in?
We can be found on LinkedIn, obviously, Natalie Ferguson, Kristen Lundman, and Powrsuit. And check us out at powrsuit.com. We are on LinkedIn and Instagram for the most part, and that's powrsuit.com.
So good. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
You.